So I thank Rabbi for handing out the handouts, for the opportunity to be able to speak here. And trigger warning. People may find some of the thoughts that I'll be sharing triggering. I'll give you an indication when that moment is. All right, it's not lost on any of us that since last year, our world has been permanently changed. The entire world experienced something singular 10 months ago. One of those unique before and after moments. However, for reasons that are obvious to everybody, no one was affected more than us, the Jewish people. And even for Jews, the Jews of America have endured a truly brutal awakening. From among the Jews of the diaspora, we have long sat complacent here while we watched our brothers in Europe and elsewhere suffer the frightening rise in Jew hatred. We thought, not here. How often have I heard very smart Jews say over the last months that they had thought that anti-Semitism was basically dead in America, gone. Somehow, we thought ourselves immune to this. Sure, there were the occasional attacks and acts of hatred. Saw those as lone wolf events. Certainly not representative of the larger element. After all, anti-Semitism was extinct in America, right? Well, we know very, very different today. And we've all awakened from a fool's slumber. But as believing Jews, it's incumbent upon us to draw lessons from the events of the world that we live in. So please permit me to share with you a thought, just one thought. Now, as a thought, it's really, truly uncomplicated, but it's deceptively and exasperatingly difficult to employ. If you look at your handout, the first pasuk, number 1, the pasuk we open Megillat Eicha with. Eicha yasheva badad ha'ir rabati am. How does the city once great with people sit forlorn? I'm going to focus on one word, badad. Solitary, alone. Now here, clearly, it's being employed in the negative form, denoting a solitariness of abandonment, dismissal, and debasement. However, it seems clear that there are other manner of usage for the exact same word. And this is pointed out by Rav Tanchum HaYerushalmi in his commentary on Eicha. And he points to a pasuk. The pasuk says, number 2 on the handout, Hashem badad yamchenu ve'ein imo el nechar. Same word badad. Here it's speaking about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem alone guided them, and there's no foreign power with him. Now clearly there, it's a statement of grandeur. The solitariness there was one of elevation, uniqueness, of gravitas. So these are contradictory usages of the same term. So Rabbi Tanchum HaYerushalmi explains that, yes, these are two different usages of the exact same word, not uncommon in Hebrew. The same idea is written by Rabbi Shlomo Pappenheim, a great linguist. And he comes to the conclusion on his own, and he utilizes other psukim. Well, let's take a look at those, 3 and 4. Here they're referring to the Jewish people, Badad. Vayishkon Yisrael betach Badad. And Israel resided alone in safety. Betach, safe, Badad, alone. Number 4 in the handout. Hein am levadad yishkon, uva goyim lo yitchashav. Here is a nation that dwells alone and is not reckoned amongst the nations. This was said by Bilam. In both of these cases, the term is one of positiveness. In both of these cases, the isolation is one of virtue and strength, in contrast to the one that opens Raccah, that is a term of weakness and mourning. This is the linguistic approach to the dual usage. But in the Gemara, we already find a spiritual explanation of the duality of usage for this term. Listen to the Gemara. Yashivad Badad, referring to the Pasuk in Raccah, Amar Rava, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rava said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Ani amarti, Vayishkon Yisrael betach badad ein Yaakov el Eretz Dagan v'tirov, af shamav yarfital. I, says Hashem, utilize the term badad to refer to the Jewish people in a positive term, that they reside secure and solitary. But now, Achshav, badad moshava. But now, their place of dwelling will be desolate. So the Marsha explains that initially their strength allowed them to be alone and secure, but now due to their debasement, he had them sit solitary due to their repulsiveness. The Midrash provides an explanation for the change. And the Midrash writes as follows. When the Jews did the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they were granted security in solitude. But now when they have sinned, the city sits forlorn due to their banishment. So in other words, the same term, badad, solitary, when we do the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that solitariness is one of elevation and nobility. When we don't do the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then that same solitariness is one of debasement and isolation. Let me share with you now the thought of Rabbi Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, the Netziv. And he presents a different interpretation, and this one has some frightening implications. He writes as follows. Hashem desired that the Jews be set apart from the nations of the world. And if the Jews accepted this position, then the nations would respect them and their solitariness. However, if the Jews would endeavor to connect with the nations of the world by adopting their behaviors or their practices, then Hashem would still have the Jews be solitary, but it would be accomplished by turning the nations of the world against the Jews, and therefore isolate them. Either way, says the Netziv, the Jews are destined to be solitary, with the distinction being whether their solitariness will be one of elevation and respect, or one of hatred and debasement. And this explains the apparent contradictory usage of the term badad. It depends how we are relating to the nations of the world. Interestingly, the Beit HaLevi has essentially the same concept. And the truth is, it's almost explicit in a Midrash. The Midrash writes as follows. L'lamdacha to teach you, Kishemet Yosef heferu berit milah. When Yosef HaSadik died in Egypt, they defied the Brit Milah. They ceased to perform it. Why? Amiru, the Jews said in Egypt, Niyeh k'Mitzrayim. We're going to be like the Egyptians. Even Shasu came, as soon as they did that, Hafach HaKadosh Baruch Hu ha'ava she'ayu ha'Mitzrim ohavim otan l'sinah. God transformed the love that the Egyptians loved them to hatred. Shenemar hafach libav lisno amo lehitnakel ba'avadav. So here we see pretty clearly that when the Jews were doing the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that Hashem had the Egyptians loving them and treating them with respect. But the moment they broke that in an attempt to emulate the way of the Egyptians, that Hashem turned the Egyptian attitude towards them to one of hatred. Now this idea is actually fundamental in the Netziv's Welt Umchung. He repeats it easily half a dozen times. I think it's closer to at least 10. Some places he elaborates more, some places he elaborates less. But let me share with you something that comes from his magisterial study on anti-Semitism. It's not well known. At least, I hadn't heard about it until Shabbat. I found it quoted, and thank God, I found it. I had the Sefer. It's in the back of his commentary on Shir HaShirim. It's a study on anti-Semitism from the vantage point of the Rosh Hashiva of Volozhin. And then Netziv writes over there the following. It's a fascinating idea. He said that Kadosh Baruch Hu desired that the Jewish nation serve as a light unto the other nations of the world, a model for them to emulate. And in fact, in this vein, he tells Abraham Avinu that he would be Av Hamon Goyim, a father to a host of nations. And accordingly, he would instruct the nations of the world, whether by word or by deed, towards a monotheistic belief and general civility. However, this interaction with the nations could potentially lead, chas v'shalom, to a connection to them. And therefore, in the very same conversation, Hashem commands Abraham Avinu the mitzvah of Brit Milah. Why? In order to drive a wedge, to create a separation and division between the nations of the world and the Jews. So we are supposed to serve as a model for them, but not allow connection. That's not so easy to do. Not very easy. In the same study, the Netziv presents the same idea with an interesting analogy. He says that the Jews are compared to fire, and the nations of the world are compared to a raging stream of water. Now, as long as there is a pot that separates them, right, the water in the pot, representing the Goyim, the Jews, the fire under the pot, then all's good. In fact, more than just being all good, the fire serves to bring about benefit by heating up the water, to cook, to clean, to heal. There's positive benefit from that. The indirect contact of the fire to the water is beneficial. However, he writes, without the intervening substance, once the water meets the fire being the Jews, the water extinguishes it. Similarly, he explains, as long as there is a separation between the Jews and the nations, the Jews can elevate and bring benefit to the nations. But if the Jews mix with the nations directly, then the light of the Jews, chas v'shalom, can be extinguished. Thus, according to the Netziv, the Jews are destined for solitude, as we mentioned. Preferably a solitude of elevation and refinement, detached from the nations of the world, by which they could serve as a model to be emulated. However, if the Jews were to forego this noble solitude and then connect with the nations, then Hashem would force solitude upon them by turning the nations against them. The hatred of the nations bringing them an undesired isolation. All right, so today, we are met with a pervasive and multi-nuanced hatred that we haven't seen in decades. And some of it is completely new. Certainly we're familiar with the animosity of the Islamists. That's no surprise to us. However, it is the detestation from those we thought were friends, and if not friends, at least allies, that completely caught us off guard. And it's not just the hatred, right? It's more the intensity and the irrationality of that hatred. The consistent barrage of misrepresentation, false allegations, and outright lies don't cease. They only seem to increase. The double standard applied to Israel specifically, and the Jews in general, has become de rigueur and taken to absurd levels. Let's talk acronyms. If you look at the handout at number 6, you have a little puzzle. It's a little puzzle. 6 letters. 6 letters that contrast how they look at us and how they look at the rest of the world. Can you figure it out? Okay, I'll help you. Every other letter. Okay, so the first letter, D, the second from that, E, and then second from that, I. D, E, I. And then opposite that, the second letter, B, the fourth letter, D, and the final letter S. DEI versus BDS. When it comes to the rest of the world, they scream DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion. That's for the world. But when it comes to the Jews, it's different letters. We get a B, a D, and an S. Boycott, divestment, and sanction. The inexplicable attention of global organizations that sit in judgment of us, who seem to occupy themselves solely with singling us out. Now that would be bizarre and comic if it wasn't deadly serious. And it goes on and on and on. I believe we can all agree that the nations of the world, to a real extent, have turned against us. A show of hands, and you don't have to put up your hand if you're uncomfortable. Who today feels less safe in America than since October 7th? Okay, that's a lot of people. Is this explosion of hatred and manifestation of the deceived's warning? Have we broken boundaries of excessiveness and non-essential connection to the people of the country we reside in, and thus brought this upon ourselves? Well, we're all familiar with the age-old question. Which are you? Are you an American Jew or a Jewish American? The difference being, the American Jew's primary identity is as a Jew, but he has some American characteristics. While the Jewish American identifies as an American with some Jewish elements. What would the Netziv think of this question? I'll tell you what I think. I think the Netziv would reject both of the options. And he would present the third one. The third one being, as a Jew living in America without any element of American influence. Now let me be clear. I am not advocating, Chas v'Shalom, a Unabomber or disconnection from society. I am not. Okay? The opposite, right? Chazal are clear in Pirkei Avot, right? Rabbi Chanina Sagan HaKohanim Omer. Rabbi Chanina Sagan HaKohanim said, Have mitpalel b'shloma shel malchut. You have to pray for the welfare of the government. Shilmalei mora'ah, if it wasn't for the fear it engenders, ish et re'ehu chayim bela'o. People would swallow one another alive. Now that statement was made for all governments, even unfriendly ones. All the more so for the American government, known as, in our circles, Malchut Shel Chesed, a government of kindness. We must be grateful to this country and participate fully as citizens. And I don't believe that it contradicts the idea, the position of the Netziv. The Netziv would exhort us to be vigilant, to not allow ourselves to be influenced by the values, beliefs, and perspectives that are not ours, and to be cautious when engaging with the Gentiles, but nonetheless, to fulfill our responsibilities as citizens. So that brings me back to the original question. Are we guilty of overstepping in our connection to Americanism and American society? So in order to answer this, I think we need to learn a little bit about the Jewish connection to America and why it is so profound. I'm going to bring you back to a letter, a famous letter, written by none other than our first president, George Washington, to the Jewish community of Newport, Rhode Island, on August 18th, almost exactly, or August 13th, almost well over, okay, help me with the math, what's that, 230 years ago? No, is that right? Yeah, I think so. 230 years ago? No? Yeah? This is what he wrote. The citizens of the United States of, it's number 7. The citizens of the United States of America have a right to applaud themselves for having given to mankind examples of an enlarged and liberal policy. A policy worthy of imitation. All possess alike liberty of conscience and immunities of citizenships. It is now no more than toleration is spoken of, as it was by the indulgence of one class of people, that another enjoy the exercise of their inherent natural rights. For happily the government of the United States, which gives to bigotry no sanction, to persecution no assistance, requires only they who live under its protection should demean themselves as good citizens in giving in all occasions their effectual support. Yes, it was written in the 1700s. Yes. So let me help you. We're going to translate this. Now the letter was written as a response to an address given by Moses, I'm not sure I'll pronounce it correctly, Sexias, I may be pronouncing it incorrectly, a Jewish person. He was the leader of the community there in Newport. So of course, where the famous synagogue is, the Turo Synagogue. He made this address, and he later sent the address, had it written, and sent it to Washington. Now the tone and the confidence of Washington's letter are extraordinary. And many historians consider it to be the single most important document in American Jewish history. Let's just focus on a few points, and I bolded them so it should be a little bit easier. Now no more that toleration is spoken of. What does he mean? The Jews in Europe, from which the Jews of America had escaped, they had become accustomed to a life of at most toleration by the rulers of the land. They had no rights. They had no privileges. They were merely tolerated. And that toleration carried an implied possibility to be rescinded at any moment. Number one. Now he is saying, in America, you are not being tolerated. You have rights. They also had no inherent natural rights as humans to freedom of any form. They were simply tolerated, dehumanized, chattel, until they were no longer useful. We can switch over. Hold on. Switch over. And that is the essence of Washington's letter to the Jewish community in Newport. What were the results of this new world and its brave social experiment? So the Jews that had fled to America, they fled to escape persecution and hatred. And now they found themselves in an experience like anything they had ever experienced in diaspora since the beginning of the Galut. And they grabbed it with both hands. This could be the beginning of the Jewish tendency towards liberalism. We were gifted this. We were gifted, because we weren't allowed it in the past, we were gifted having rights, having liberties, having freedoms. We are going to stand for every and everybody who wants the same. And hence, liberalism. It was a grateful response to a country that allowed them to have natural rights and religious freedom. And accordingly, historically, they stood by those who looked for freedom, such as the Black Civil Rights Movement in the early 1960s. As such, the present wave of hatred is particularly hurtful to the Jews of America, for now they're experiencing some of that bigotry and persecution that Washington said would have no place here. Okay, so maybe we can make a case that some Jews in America have broken the boundaries of connection and influence in this great country that we live in. But that doesn't apply to us, right? The Orthodox, we're above that, right? We keep to ourselves and we're not influenced by American culture. Maybe if the Netziv lived among us today, he would look upon us with approval. Maybe. As such, American culture creep cannot be seen as partially responsible for the anti-Semitism we are witnessing, right? I mean, look at the Midrash, okay? Midrash is number 9. Number 9. Hen'am levadad yishon. Behold, a nation that sits apart. Amar lo Balak. So this is a conversation between Balak and Bilam. Amar lo Balak. So Balak said to Bilam, Balak's becoming frustrated. Bilam is not cursing the Jews. Seems like actually blessing them. So if you can't curse them, I have a new idea. Curse another nation, and then mix the Jews with that nation. And then they'll be cursed by extension, by connection to that other nation. Brilliant idea. Amar lo, so Bilam said to him, Eini yachol, I can't. Ein am livadad yishkon, they are a nation that lives apart. Muvdalin heim min haumot b'chol davar. They are disengaged and separated from the nations in all manner. Bilvushehem, in their garments. B'ma'achalam, in their food. U'b'gufehem, their bodies. U'b'pitchehem, their doors. What does this mean? What does it mean? What does it mean that we're different from them with our clothes? I don't know. I mean, it's not a designer suit, but I mean, it looks like something somebody else could wear. What he means is that we wear tzitzit, we wear tefillin, and we do not wear sha'atnes. We have rules that apply to our clothing that separates us. We have rules of tzniut, modesty, for both men and women. By our food, he does not mean lots of bagels, okay? What he does mean is the laws of kashrut and the laws of bishul akum, food cooked by Gentiles. Our bodies, he means the mitzvah, brit milah. Our doorways, he means the mezuzah. In other words, our mitzvot create a natural barrier between us and the nations. So, as observant Jews, we are good, right? We are separated by a mitzvah performance, and the Netziv would concur. Correct? So, I think that if we truly turn the magnifying glass of brutal and honest introspection upon ourselves, we may find that I'm talking about ourselves, the Orthodox community. We may find that boundaries of cultural separation have indeed been breached. We have been influenced in more than a little. Now I could give you many, many examples. I will suffice with just one. Here's the trigger warning. Please do not throw things at me. There is a behavior today that has gained considerable traction, particularly within the most strict of Orthodox groups. And again, please don't throw things. I speak of shidduch photos. More and more frequently, the shidduch resume, by the way, doesn't that usage indicate something on its own? Must be accompanied by a photo. If you do not include it, it will be asked for. Also, unusually, there is more urgency for a girl's photo than a boy's. Now, what does that say? Now, for a community that has essentially removed all photos of women from publications, there would seem to be some cognitive dissonance that the shidduch photos is seen as completely acceptable and even required. Now, I personally believe that the practice is incorrect, but I don't want to belabor arguing that point here today. I have one simple question. Photography is about 200 years old. Color photography, I was interested to learn this, is over 100 years old. So, why are we only thinking about this now? Why didn't it exist in my generation? Or in that of my parents? Reasonably clear pictures have been available for over 100 years. And the simple answer is that it was understood to be wrong. Today, many Rabbanim are against the practice. In fact, a few years ago, there was a Nix the Pics initiative that was endorsed by many Rabbanim. Now, talking about previous generations, there is one precedent. The famous Chabiner Rabbi was offered a shidduch for his daughter. The other side lived very far away, so they asked for a photo. And I refer you now to number 9. The Chabiner Rav responded in the negative by way of a play on the pasuk in number 9. Now you have to read it like a chassid. in order to get it. So I will do the best I can. The Shmir Rov is a chassid. I do the best I can to read it. Vayomer lovon, vayayis lechayim bin kumayni, vosei satzilo lifnei habechilo. Now, when you read it that way, it means something different. It means that it's not done in our place to give that tzura, the appearance, before the bechira, the choice. In our place, we allow people to choose. We don't influence it with a tzura, with an appearance. Now, I believe that I often have a sense of what my Rabbi, Chacham Avad Yosef, would say about a given situation. I have no doubt that he would have been opposed. Okay, so let's ask ourselves another question. If the Rabbanim did not come up with this idea, then where did it originate? Now, let's be brutally honest. I believe it is a result of culture creep. I could even speculate further, and again, please do not fling things in my general direction. I could even speculate further about the timing of this new practice with the following. Dating websites are about 20 years old. But the proliferation of dating apps is only about 10 to 12 years old. Not that long ago. Now those apps are largely driven by photos. This is right around the time that the shidduch photo began to make it on the scene. A coincidence? Even if this is correct, right, I believe that the practice wasn't intended to copy American culture, but it may have been an invisible, unknown source. Meaning, somebody said, oh, maybe we'll ask for a photo, not realizing that they had heard about something called an app that has pictures of people that help people get dates. Culture creep. Now, even if my speculation is wrong, and I fully grant that that may be the case, it still seems to me that the practice is an outgrowth of the society we live in that puts a very high premium on external appearance over internal substance. And that is not a Jewish value. This is one example, just one. If we step back, I believe that if we step back and objectively look at the ebbs and flows of our religious, communal, and personal lives, we will surely find other penetration of American culture. So, would the Netziv give us a concurring nod? I wonder. Going back to Badad, solitary, we have two versions of it, right? An aloneness born out of nobility and refinement, which brings honor from the nations of the world around us. Or B, a solitariness born out of debasing imitation, which awakens rejection and hatred in the nations around us. Which do we want, A or B? So I hope that we would select A. So if we do select A, so what's our path back? What's it going to take for us to return to that aloofness of nobility? And the answer is already given to us by the Netziv. We don't have to dig very much. He told us. We need to embrace fully our Jewishness to the exclusion of external influence. And again, that does not mean we should become hermetic and antisocial. We need to live our lives understanding that we are truly different from those around us. So you ask yourself, how different are we? We all look the same. No, we don't. Consider the following psukim. And just 4 psukim. Just 4. Ve'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim ve'goy kadosh. And you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Ki am kadosh ata l'Hashem Elohecha. Because you are a holy nation to Hashem your God. And fascinatingly, 2 verses that are almost identical, but just literally 2 little changes between them. So I'm going to just read it once. Ki am kadosh Hashem, ki am kadosh ata l'Hashem Elohecha. But you, because you are a holy nation unto Hashem your God. B'cha Hashem Elohecha liot lo le'am sigula. In you, Hashem is chosen to be for him a treasured nation, Mikol ha'amin, from amongst all the other nations in the world, asher al panei ha'adamah, that are on the face of the earth. Hashem designated us as a holy nation of priests, a treasure. He has chosen us and He loves us. So how does that difference manifest itself? And does that distinction apply equally to all of us? Maybe somebody will say, yeah, but maybe only like great people are like really different. But I'm not. I'm just a regular person. I'm not really that different, right? The great people, they're different. The great tzaddikim and tzadkaniyot, they're different, but not me. I mean, not me. So I will share with you just one idea from the famous Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner. While we may appear to be like all the other peoples on earth, we are spiritually completely in a different space. We, the Jewish people, were plugged into the spiritual dimension, while the other nations are not. Now, that may sound elitist, and it reminds me of a story. My father, Zichron Raccah, was once giving a shiur, and he mentioned something along these lines, how the Jewish people are distinguished from amongst the nations of the world, how we've been set apart from the nations of the world, how we're a noble race. And one of the people attending the shiur asked him the following: Professor Raccah, that sounds elitist. Without missing a beat, my father said, but it's intended to. We are. Now, it doesn't mean, therefore, that we should debase others. It doesn't mean we should dismiss others, chas v'shalom, because that's not noble. But it means we need to know who we are. We need to understand what we are. We need to understand where we are in this world and what the world is because of us. Today is Tisha B'Av. The two Batei Mikdash were destroyed. One by Nebuchadnezzar and the other by Titus. These actions had catastrophic consequences. Okay, so if I asked anybody here, have any of us ever done something as grievous as burning the Beit HaMikdash? Your very reasonable response would be, of course not. Chas v'sholom. Never. Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner thinks a little differently, though. Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner writes, it's fascinating, I can't fully develop it here, but I suggest you read it right at the beginning of the book, the first shire of the 4th chapter. It's not a very difficult read. Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner writes that while Nebuchadnezzar and Titus burnt the Batei Mikdash down, that was in the earthial plane. In the spiritual plane, where God resides, they did 0 damage. 0 damage. Why? Because they're not connected. They're not plugged in. Their actions only have effect here, but because that's where they are rooted, but they do not have any effect in the upper realms. None. But we who have sinned, and at that time polluted the upper Beit HaMikdash, writes from Chaim Volozhiner, provided Nebuchadnezzar and Titus the opportunity to destroy the lower Beit HaMikdash. The Midrash writes it as follows: Kimcha techina tachint. You ground already grounded flour. What does it mean? What does the Midrash mean? It means that the Beit HaMikdash, for all intents and purposes, in both cases, was already destroyed by our actions. It just needed somebody to light the fire. And that's all they did. They only carried through what we had already done. Not in this plane, in that plane, in the one that counts the most. So says Rabbi Chaim Volozhiner the following: when a Jew allows a negative thought to enter his mind, which is the equivalent of the microcosm Kodesh HaKadashim, he damages the spiritual Beit HaMikdash above. An act that Nebuchadnezzar and Titus could never do. Alternatively, when we have positive thoughts, we bring holiness to the upper realms. And again, something that the Goyim are not capable of. That is the power and awesome responsibility that we have as Jews. And it sets us apart from all the nations of the world. So, our first act, our first job, our first responsibility, if we want to return to a solitariness of nobility, is to fully embrace that we are different. We are a nation of nobility, and nobility is expected from us. When the nations see it, they respect it, and when they don't, they despise us. Let me share a story. So, what I'm going to say is, Halavai should happen to more of us, but here, it's a story about a Rabbi Eliyahu Levine, who was the Rosh Kollel, the Hosher Mishpat Kollel in Lakewood. He was on an airplane, and the time came to daven Shacharit. He didn't bother anybody, he didn't go anywhere, sat in his seat, put on his talit and his tefillin, and began to pray. He didn't ask anybody for anything. He simply focused on his Jewishness. He focused on his mitzvot. He did what Hashem wanted him to do, and wasn't asking anything from anybody. A stewardess, flight attendant, noted him in his place, doing his thing, being noble in his Jewishness. And the following three things occurred. And again, I grant that this is unusual. The following three things occurred. Number one, she came to the understanding that she was not dressed in a way that was appropriate around a person occupied with such a noble act. So she went and got a blanket to cover herself. Number one. Number two, she made an announcement that breakfast would be delayed until the rabbi was done. Number three, she further announced that all passengers should try to use the washrooms in the front of the plane because they shouldn't pass the rabbi while he is praying. Now, that obviously recognizes an unusual occurrence, but where did it come from? Where did it come from? It came from exactly what the Netziv is telling us. If you are noble in your Jewishness, if you apply yourself to your Jewishness and disregard what is going on around you, no distractions, people recognize it, people respect it, people will elevate it, and they'll elevate you. They'll elevate you. Now, if you get on a plane and put on your tefillin and this doesn't happen, don't come and argue. It's not my fault, okay? I'm trying to just point out that this is real. And this is, by the way, not a unique tale. There are many stories, many stories about great Gedolim who traveled a lot. For example, the great Rav Natan Greenblatt traveled extensively. Our Rav Aaron Soloveitchik traveled regularly. And there are stories about the relationship, the respect, the cordiality that was accorded to him by the flying staff. I'll tell you a story that I heard from one of my shul members about Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. This fellow was at a baseball game, American pastime. He was at a baseball game. He had a kippah. He was tapped on the shoulder by somebody. Didn't seem Jewish. The person said, "You look Jewish." Yep. Do you maybe know Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik? He said, "I did." The man said, "What do you mean you did?" I said, "He passed away not long ago." The man was shocked. Now, first of all, how has he even heard of Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik? He was shocked. He got up, took his phone, made a phone call. Came back a few minutes later and said the following. Rav Aaron would travel weekly, I believe it's weekly, to New York City to give shiur in Yeshiva University. He always took the same flight, the exact same flight, there and back, the exact same one. And it was therefore not uncommon that the exact same personnel would accompany him on those flights. And they developed a tremendous respect for him. And they accorded him all manner of privileges without him asking for anything. Because of who he was, showed them attention, showed them appreciation, showed them gratitude, respected them, and they gave it back to him multiple times over. This man's wife was one of those attendants. And she would come home speaking about how she had seen Rav Aaron Soloveitchik that day. That's how the man knew his name, because he never met Rav Aaron. He came back and he said, I told my wife and she is distraught. And she's crying on the phone. That such a man has passed. That's nobility when you do what is incumbent upon us as a Jew. So, by minding our own business, by occupying ourselves with our primary responsibility of being a Jew, and by elevating ourselves in our behavior vis-a-vis the Goyim, we have the capacity to reverse. We have the capacity to reverse this situation. But we need to do more than simply act as Jews. We have to reverse completely all of the negative, stereotypical Jewish behaviors. All of them. All of them. We have to treat the Goyim with tremendous respect. Like you would treat any person, and you would expect anybody to treat you. You cannot act towards them in a dismissive way, because that's not how a noble person acts. Treat them with respect, and they'll give you respect 10 times more. You'll see. I've seen it in my lifetime. It's a given. Because they're looking for that. They're expecting that from you. They may not know it in their head, but they know it in their soul. They know who you are vis-a-vis them. They want to respect you. You have to give them the chance. Be less like them, be more of who we are, and you'll see it's going to happen. Let me say it a little bit differently. If you look at the number 5. V'yitem li kidoshim, you will be holy for me. Why? Ki kadosh ani Hashem, because I, the Lord, am holy. And here it comes. Va'avdil etchem min ha'amim liyot li, and I have separated you from the nations to be for me. What does this mean? Easy, simple, not complicated. Hashem has separated us from the nations to be for Him, to be His nation. So therefore, if I focus on my Jewishness and I disengage myself with the behaviors of the nations of the world, then I am with Hashem and not the nations. But if I do not accept the Havdalah, if I do not accept the disengagement, then what am I telling Hashem? I want to be with them and not with you. And how do the nations of the world respond to that? They don't want that. They want you. They want you to be on the pedestal. They want that from you. So in simple terms, it's one or the other. Do I want to be with Hashem, or do I want to be with the nations of the world? I can select to be with Hashem by practicing my Judaism, by focused on what the Torah wants from me, to the exclusion of that which happens around me, and then I'm noble and I'm elevated, and the nations of the world are going to respect me. But if I select to connect to the nations, then I forego the bond with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the nations of the world, they're going to come against me. So how do you know? How do you know what is a foreign influence? How do you know? How do you know? I mean, I have a telephone. Is that a foreign influence? In certain ways, it definitely is. I believe that if you have one little strategy that may be helpful. Ask yourself the following. If I was sitting in front of Moshe Feinstein, would I be comfortable doing what I'm doing? The answer is yes. Go. If the answer is no, then you know the answer. You know the answer. If you wouldn't be comfortable in front of Moshe Feinstein, or in my case, in front of Chacham Ovadia, if you wouldn't be comfortable, don't do that. You don't do that. If I could pull out my phone in front of the Rav and make a phone call, then it's okay. If I pull out my phone and do other things, and I wouldn't do that there, that's a foreign influence. That's alien. That's not you. And by doing that, you're making a choice, Chalila, to not be with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, to not be with Hashem. That's a choice that we're making. So the next time you are drawn to a cultural interest that's not Jewish, just ask yourself, do I want to be with Hashem, or do I want to be with the nations of the world? And if somebody asks you, if you're an American Jew, or Jewish American, what are you going to answer? May we all, Bezrat Hashem, find the path to reconnect in the most powerful way with our connection of Torah and Mitzvot HaKadosh Baruch Hu. By doing so, Bezrat Hashem, transform the horrors that we are witnessing, continue to witness every moment of every day. May we see, Bezrat Hashem, the return of the hostages, the protection of all the soldiers. And Bezrat Hashem, the end to this war in the correct and positive manner. May we see the Goyim turn to us with the respect that we will have earned by virtue of our nobility, by virtue of our elevation, and through that see the coming Mashiach. Amen. Amen.